Canals occupy a strange place in the cultural imagination. They're man-made, yet offer a connection to nature, and they offer a means of transport, but one that's only accessible by boat. Some cities depend on canals, like Amsterdam or Venice, while in the UK, canals are often overlooked or forgotten spaces that have long outlived their original purpose. There's also surprisingly less folklore about canals than you might imagine, given the amount you can find about rivers or lakes. It's not that they're new as a concept, because the Romans built the Fossdyke to connect Lincoln to the River Trent in 50 CE, and the Grand Canal of China dates to the 10th century. But in Britain, the real Canal Age didn't begin until the later 18th century, with canals built to ease the transport of goods. While the railways took over as the transport of choice in the 19th century, the canals remained, and some stayed in use until the 1960s. So what legends or ghost stories have clung to these man-made British waterways? Let's find out in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. I will admit with these episodes, because I'm doing them a couple of weeks in advance now, I have no idea when they're going to come out, so if you wonder why I'm not referring to anything that's going on in the news, that's because whatever's going on in the news probably hasn't happened yet, and if I mention anything that's happening now, it might have been over by the time you actually hear the episode. So just in case anyone's wondering why I'm not referring to anything particularly timely. But anyway, we are looking at canals this week, and I'm not going to lie, this one was actually really hard, because I was like, oh, there's going to be loads of legends and loads of folklore, and then I looked and I was like, oh, there's not. Lovely. I thought I've already said I'll do it. So, I looked at some of the ones in Amsterdam, I looked at Den Bosch in the Netherlands, which I've also been to, I had a look at Venice, and there was just nothing about the specific actual waterways. It was just stuff that had happened in the area, so I was like, do you know what, I'm just going to have to find something else to look at. But then I did come across quite a lot of ghost stories associated with canals. So we all know how much I love a good ghost story here on Fabulous Folklore. So a lot of the stories that follow are more heavily related to ghosts and so on. And I have decided to stick with British ones just because of the fact that it ties the episode together, I guess. And because I did find that there were actually a lot to look at. There are obviously a lot more ghost stories than I have found here, but I thought I'm only going to choose a handful of canals because obviously we don't have 3 hours, so we'll just have a look at these ones. And I decided to start with the Grand Union Canal, which runs between Birmingham and London, and it's Britain's longest canal. It's also very much a piecemeal effort because it was a range of independent canals that were then connected between 1894 and 1929. Grand Union generally refers to the stretch between Birmingham and Brentford, although another branch stretches to Paddington in London. A white lady was spotted on the banks of the Grand Union Canal in Brentford. According to legend, she's the ghost of a murder victim. Someone found a woman's torso in this area, with her legs recovered from a train at Waterloo. Another white lady wanders the towpath near Milton Keynes at night, and while no one knows who she is, legend thinks she's looking for a long-lost lover. And I must admit, I do find that really annoying about white lady ghosts, the fact that they're always tied with some sort of grief for a man that they've lost. And I bet there's a bit more variety in their backstories than that. But anyway, further north at Blisworth in Northamptonshire, strange sounds and lights refer to 2 deaths on the canal in 1861 in the tunnel. Now, despite the fact that it's 2,813 metres long, it did originally only have 1 ventilation shaft. So 1 person suffocated, while another one became unconscious and fell into the canal where they drowned. Witnesses since then have reported hearing coughing or a splash as if something heavy has landed in the water, while another saw lights in the tunnel as if made by the original builders. These events coincided with the canal's bicentenary and the following year, but don't seem to have happened again, at least not in front of witnesses. And this is one of the problems with ghosts. It's a bit like that age-old story, does the light go off in the fridge when you shut the door? Because you've got no way of knowing unless you open the door again. So you see what I mean? It's one of those things, it's an observational issue. So these ghosts might be pottering about all of the time. But if there's no one there to see them, it doesn't get recorded. So just because other people haven't encountered it doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means it's not happening when people are there, if that makes any kind of sense. That's something that I always bear in mind when people are like, oh, there's only been 1 sighting of this ghost. And I'm like, because there was only 1 witness. But that doesn't mean that's the only time the ghost has appeared. But that's a massive tangent, so I'll bring it back to the topic. And we're going to have a look at the Shropshire Union Canal. Now, this is more of a network than a singular canal, with the Llangollen and Montgomery branches stretching into Wales. And the canal links a system in the West Midlands with the Mersey and the Manchester Ship Canal. And in one story from 1914, a pair of nightingales built a nest near the Newport branch of the Shropshire Union Canal for the first time. People gathered at night to hear them sing, although 7 deaths happened in the area after they arrived, so people said they hoped that the nightingales never returned. Ghosts also appear at various points along the canal, and a Roman centurion guards the entrance to Chester at the Old North Gate because the canal intersected with the town moat here. Elsewhere, people hear horse hooves on cobblestones around Market Drayton, although they see no horses, and some people think it's a phantom horse forever pulling ghostly barges along the canal. Just beyond Market Drayton lies Turley Middle Lock, and those who use the lock in the middle of the night have reported someone, or something, shutting the lock gates behind their boat, which is actually quite a helpful ghost, so nobody seems particularly perturbed by that one. It would just be a bit odd. Witnesses also reported the ghost of the American pilot who crashed near the canal during the Second World War at Little On as well, although I'm not quite sure what he does, but he must be visible for people to know that's who he is. However, a hideous creature apparently also appears at Bridge 39, described as the ghost of a boatman who drowned here. In 1879, a labourer transporting a cart of luggage reached the bridge outside Norbury at around 10 p.m. one night in January. A black figure with huge eyes jumped out of the hedge beside the road and landed on the horse. When the labourer tried to dislodge it with his whip, he was horrified to see the whip pass straight through the creature. The labourer fell out of the cart and the horse fled, with the creature still on its back. While it's unclear what happened to the horse, cart or creature, the man ended up in bed with terror for a few days, and he went back a little while later and did actually find his whip where he had dropped it, but there was no sign of the cart or the horse. Another sighting of this so-called monkey man dates to the 1980s, when a family passed under the bridge in their longboat. The father happened to look up as they went beneath the bridge and saw a black, hairy, monkey-like creature looking down at him, but it was actually gone by the time the boat emerged from the other side of the bridge. I'm not entirely sure how you get from ghost of a boatman who drowned there to monkey man. That bit is a little bit unusual, shall we say, but that's basically how that one apparently plays out. So if you have seen the monkey man on the Shropshire Union Canal, then please do feel free to let me know, because it feels like that one, there seems to be a little bit more to it maybe. So I thought that one was a more extensive story than some of the other ones. But speaking of the Welsh branch of the Shropshire Union Canal, the Monmouthshire and Brecon Canal also boasts a few ghostly figures. And I will say for this part I have 3 place names which I did get the help of the superb Dr. Delyth Badder, so I could try and pronounce the names properly. Now, the canal is a network in the Usk Valley in the Banau Brycheiniog National Park, and originally it was the Brecknock and Abergavenny Canal, and the two were then linked at Pontamoyla in 1812. People sometimes report seeing a figure carrying a lantern at Pontamoyla on misty nights, but far from being terrifying, some think he's a former canal worker still keeping the canal safe. A glowing orb floats along the canal path near Llangattig, although no one knows what that one is. And that one, some people think it's another lantern, other people think it's a ghost. There is a possibility with something like that you also then get into the realm of the fae folk instead, but again, there doesn't seem to be enough information to be able to draw a conclusion one way or the other about that one. In near Llangynnydr, people have heard a man crying, and some think he's grieving his lover who died in the canal. I did try to find a little bit more information about those ones because it feels like they're just fragments, but again, I couldn't really find a huge amount. So if you know anything else about those, please do feel free to comment and we'll get the conversation started on those ones. And we are now going to have a look at the Regent's Canal in London. And this was intended to connect the Grand Junction Canal from Paddington all the way to Limehouse. And doing so basically meant that instead of having to offload goods at Paddington and then take them by road through the streets to the Thames in the city, you would be able to just take them on canals and essentially keep them off the roads, which was the whole point of canals in the first place. And famed architect John Nash took on the job while he was busy setting out Regent's Park. So he's the one who's responsible for Regent's Park and also Regent Street as well. Work began in 1812 and the stretch from Paddington to Camden opened in 1816. The Regent's Canal overlapped with the River Fleet in Kentish Town, the Fleet being one of London's buried rivers, and obviously if you remember from a couple of weeks ago I did take you along the route of the Walbrook, one of the other buried rivers, so if you are interested in that kind of thing then you might enjoy that episode. But I thought that was quite interesting that one of the canals actually intersected with one of the lost rivers. And during the excavations for the canal, workers then buried the fleet beneath the canal between Kentish Town Road and Camden Road. Now, Lord Byron commented that the area around the point where the Grand Junction and Regent's Canal met could do with being a bit more like Venice, and the council took up his idea in the 1950s, so obviously sometime later, renaming the area Little Venice. So if you've ever wondered where the name came from, we do like a good set of etymology of names here on Fabulous Folklore. That is where Little Venice comes from. Now, Regent's Canal appears in lots of news stories, usually due to inquests following drownings. And when I had a look, in 1909, there was like 4 or 5 people who'd either fallen in the Regent's Canal or their body had been dumped in Regent's Canal. And it seemed like actually quite a dangerous place to spend any time. But not all of the stories end badly. And I want to include this one because it's not folklore. It was just a really interesting one. And you can sort of almost picture it. Because one young woman jumped off the bridge into the canal after her husband abandoned her, which is awful. But her crinoline got stuck in the railings, so she was then hanging harmlessly from the bridge until a passing carter rescued her. And in my head, I like to think that that's how they met and fell in love, which would be an absolutely awesome how we met story. But it doesn't say that, it just says that he rescued her. So good job he was going past, but also good job that her crinoline got stuck. So I quite like that story because at least it ends differently to the way you might imagine it would, particularly where Regent's Canal is concerned. But how about its folklore? Actress Sarah Siddons allegedly haunts one of the banks near St Mary on Paddington Green Church. There's not really any real reason for her to be connected with this particular stretch of the canal, apart from the fact that she was buried at that particular church in 1831. And people have reported seeing her in a blue dress and hat simply standing by the water. And she's described as looking like a mannequin. So I guess that's probably why she would stick in your mind a little bit, because the descriptions of her always feel like a little bit weird and a little bit uncanny in a way. So I think that's why she stands out in people's mind. People have reported hearing the cries of a woman near Lisson Grove, and some people think it's a mother who was grieving her child who died in the canal. And Camden Lock itself seems popular as a site for ghost sightings. Now, I must admit, I spent quite a lot of time in Camden when I was living in London, because obviously it was the place to go if you were a goth or a punk or in some way alternative. And I've walked by the canal I don't know how many times, and I must admit I personally never saw or experienced anything particularly weird. I just always found that there was a bit of an odd vibe next to the canal, but I tend to find that by canals in general anyway. But in terms of Camden Lock, some people have reported seeing a swimmer struggling in the water before he simply fades away before anyone can rescue him. Elsewhere, people have reported seeing a woman in Victorian clothing just floating above the water. And others claim to have seen a dishevelled man by the canal who then vanishes if anyone approaches him. And Camden might be a hub for so many sightings due to the higher amount of foot traffic in the area. So obviously if you have more people there, you've got more potential witnesses, but there are also a lot of pubs in the area, so you should probably make of that what you will. And our final canal is the Fort and Clyde Canal, and this opened in 1790 to connect the Firth of Forth and the Firth of Clyde. It fell into disuse in 1963 when the authorities closed the canal, but National Lottery funds actually paid for the Falkirk Wheel to be built to connect the Forth and Clyde and Union canals in 2002, so boats can once again travel from the Clyde to the Forth. And incidentally, our first ghost story comes from the area near the wheel. Apparently, people hear bagpipes even when no piper is around, and according to legend, a piper somehow drowned in the canal, and people think it might be his spirit continuing to play from beyond the grave. People hear a ghostly woman singing at night near Kirkintilloch, apparently still serenading her favourite canal. Meanwhile, people also see a ship's captain in the same area who apparently drowned after his boat capsized, and he issues orders to his crew before he vanishes. And near Auchen and Starry, boaters report strange feelings of being watched at dusk, while some even report seeing a mysterious figure on the canal bank who disappears when spotted. So I think that must be a bit of an odd sensation to feel like someone's watching you, but then when you look you can't actually see anyone. So that's a particularly creepy one. So what do we make of some of these canal ghost stories and folklore? Well, the relative age of canals compared to existing natural waterways could help to explain the seeming lack of folklore about canals. As places of industry primarily, it's also possible that they accrued less lore as they were more unfamiliar places to the wider population. While canals have then been brought back into use as leisure spaces, the passage of time between their heyday and their revival means that the legends and stories have likely been lost, purely because there was no one there to record them. But by comparison, they're absolutely teeming with ghost stories. And not all of the stories link to the industrial age of canals either. Rather, the waterways become the sad place where people met their end, either by accident or on purpose. And while some of the stories aren't directly about the canals, instead occurring nearby, others involve the towpath or locks. So you have to take the canals almost as a wider area that's not just the waterway itself, but also the banks and any of the equipment and stuff required to actually make the canal function. Urban canals can sometimes feel a little bit wrong compared to rivers, which might be due to the stereotype of their stagnant waters being filled with abandoned shopping trolleys, for example. By comparison, rural canals are extremely popular, offering an alternative to busy roads, a slower pace of life, and a different perspective on the countryside that rolls by. And with so many people now using the canals again, usually for leisure, has there been a corresponding uptick in supernatural activity on these fascinating waterways? It would certainly be really interesting to find out if people see more things. And remember, there was some research done, I want to say in the 60s, that one particular author posited that there was more psychic activity in London near wherever you had one of the lost rivers or the buried rivers. So if that's the case and water's some kind of psychic conduit, then you would expect there to be tons around canals. So we'll bear that in mind as well. But how many ghost sightings were missed by the canal's fall into disuse? So do the people now enjoying the wildflowers along the towpath ever encounter the spectral shades of decades past? Indeed, have the canals attracted their own genius loci through their very existence, or are they somehow spiritually dead places compared to their river and stream cousins? It is obviously something that's worth bearing in mind, because that would explain why a canal might feel weird or different compared to a river or a stream. But do let me know if you've ever experienced anything strange while either on or beside a British canal. They are a little bit of an odd concept for me in many ways, because obviously where I am in this part of the country, I found a list of all the canals in the country, and there's just this massive gap in the northeast because we just never really did canals. And I suppose when you consider all of the stuff we had around the coming of the railways and so on, we didn't really need canals to transport goods because we had sort of the railways and the wagonways that preceded them. So that might be why we're not really a canal focused people, if that makes sense. But anyway, please do feel free to let me know if anything occurs to you, if you've had any weird experiences around places like that. Just let me know, and that would be really interesting as well. Next week, we're going to either have a look at the Norfolk Broads or lakes. I haven't decided yet. It's going to depend on what I can find the most content on, really. So it'll be one or the other. And I can say that the final episode in May is going to actually be one very similar to the Walbrook. And I'm going to be following the course of a buried river, but in Newcastle. So we've got the Lochburn, and I'm going to do the same sort of thing of showing you the route, which is far shorter, and then I'll be taking off little detours as I go to point out bits of folklore or indeed ghost stories as well that we have right here in Newcastle. So if you enjoyed that more psychogeography kind of approach with the Walbrook episode, then that's kind of what we'll be doing again with the Lochburn. So that's going to be quite a lot of fun. And because we've been talking about ghost stories as well, it would be remiss of me not to mention that I am doing a talk online with the Last Tuesday Society on the 28th of May at 8 p.m. British Standard Time, which is 3 p.m. I think if you're on the East Coast of America and noon on the West Coast of America. And that is going to be on the representation of seances and the female medium in British cinema. So we'll have a look at things like mediums and things like The Stone Tape, starring Jane Asher, or we'll be looking at The Legend of Hell House. And then slightly more recent ones like The Others and what's the other one? The Woman in Black, things like that. So that one, it is online, so obviously it's accessible from anywhere with an internet connection, and there is also a replay available for 14 days if you can't make it live. So I have put the link for that one in the show notes as well if you're interested in checking out tickets for that, and it would be lovely to see you, because I always like talking about film, because that is obviously what I'm actually qualified in. So it's quite nice when I can bring ghosts and my actual qualification together, which is always nice. But anyway, so as always, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I will see you next week for either Lakes or the Norfolk Broads. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, So if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.